No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Hello and welcome to episode 391 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now, I'm genuinely pinching myself today because this guest is a huge one for me. I will go out and say this right now and fully believe it. One of the best composers that I've ever experienced, and it blows my mind that I've got him on the Mark and Me podcast. Growing up, I remember listening to my parents' record collection and hearing War of the Worlds for the first time. It was instantly iconic. I couldn't believe how incredible this whole piece of work is. It's an absolute masterpiece. So I'm absolutely thrilled to say that on today's episode, I'm joined by the man himself, Jeff Wayne. We get to sit down and talk all about the whole history of the War of the Worlds. We get to talk about the brand new vinyl which is out today as you're listening to this for National Album Day. We also get to talk about his upcoming tour next year where he's cast Rao Reynolds from Enter Shikari, and we get to talk about all this in great detail. I don't want to tell you absolutely everything now because that's what the interview's for, but what I want to do is just before we get to the interview is give a shout out to the main sponsor of the Mark and Me podcast. Yes, Vice Press. If you're in the market out there for an incredible poster for your room, some movie memorabilia, collectibles, go on vicepress.com and those guys will sort you out. And the good thing is, because they sponsor the podcast, if you're looking to treat yourself to something, then if you enter the code MarkandMe10 at the checkout, you will get 10% off your first purchase. That's what they're doing to say thank you for all the support and for being the partner of Mark and Me. But today it is absolutely incredible. I love this interview. It's one of my favourite I've done, and it's just a great celebration. So, here's me and Jeff Wayne talking all things War of the Worlds. So Jeff, welcome to the Mark and Me podcast.
Thank you, Mark and Me.
Jeff, what I like to do with all guests that come on the podcast, and it doesn't matter what your background is or whatever you're doing now in your career, I always like to go back to the very start and know when you're a child. Can you remember, because obviously with your music and your film and TV background, what it was that made you want to be what you're doing now? Was there a certain artist you were listening to? Were your parents listening to a certain music in the house? What was it about your surroundings that made you feel like this is what I want to do?
It's a good question, Mark. And the truth is that I grew up with a father who was a big pop star, popular artist in the years that I was growing up in New York. And he had 3 number 1 records in a row in America, including the best-selling single of the year in 1948. He did Broadway shows. He had his own radio program that was coast to coast, and he did a lot of live work. So it was natural for me, really, to be seeing his friends, his mates, who were singers, actors, writers, directors, coming over to our apartment in Forest Hills, New York, as well as tennis players, because he was also a national standard tennis player. So for me, now looking back over a long life of growing up and becoming a musician, those two things, sort of music and the arts, along with tennis, have been probably the two biggest influences that I got from a very little boy growing up in New York from my dad.
I'm always amazed because I believe that when I talk to a lot of people in the music industry and the film industry, that a parent's nightmare is a child to say to them, Mom, Dad, I want to be a musician, because obviously it's a very tough world to make a name for yourself. But I suppose it's completely different for you because surely your dad was so proud and wanting to encourage you and take and kind of fill the shoes that he left.
Well, I mean, to a degree, but he never imposed his life, his career on me as if this is what I should do. And in fact, years later, when I went to college in California, uh, my first 2 years, I was a journalism major. I wanted to be an investigative journalist and to solve the unproven issues that were controversial. And it was like being a detective, in my view. And I was actually a pretty good journalism major. And then at the end of 2 years, and I got this AA degree, an Associate of Arts degree, I realized that, hold on, I've been taking piano lessons my whole life. I was now in a couple of small bands, writing songs. Music was really the greater passion. So I switched to becoming a music major, and the rest just has carried on because that's what my life has been ever since.
Did you feel any pressure knowing that your dad was so successful, had one of the biggest selling songs of the whole year and all this? Did you feel like, oh God, I need to try and do something special now because I don't want to always be compared to him?
No, I think I was too young. I wasn't really conscious of the impact of media, particularly in the era that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But also, uh, I was really proud of him. As I was getting a bit older, I realized um, my pop was a pop star rather than just my pop. And I discovered some years later, because he never mentioned it. He was on the cover of Billboard, which is
Wow.
probably, you know, certainly in the United States, the major music mag ever, maybe around the world. But yeah, he was on the cover. I've got copies of it now, and the things that were written about him, I've built up a sort of a catalog of everything that was ever written about him. A lot of stuff that I never knew about. So no, I was never sort of imposed on by my dad. I think he knew, no matter how successful he was, that, as you rightly said, this industry is a brutal one. You really don't know where your next gig is coming from. And of course, there are exceptions, and the outlets today that a successful artist uh, can maximize their earnings is so different. But for me, I fell in love with music, and I'm thrilled that I've made a career out of it and still going pretty strong.
It's an amazing story, and I suppose because music is so powerful, especially live. I was only 12 when I went to one of my first concerts in Wolverhampton, and I remember the bass kind of shaking my rib cage and the hairs on my neck sticking up. And I wondered, when you were growing up, can you remember that first live, maybe it was a band or a gig or a performance or a production that you saw that made you realize that music is so much more than just in a studio?
Yeah, I can, Mark, but it was because my dad was doing Broadway musicals that either I was going to see something that he was in, but my parents loved going to the theater. And I remember certain musicals that just did to me exactly what you've just described as the bass doing to you.
Yeah.
And that's never left. And today, no matter what type of music, when it connects with anybody, you get that feeling you've been transported somewhere else, I think. And I don't have one style of music that I love. I'm pretty Catholic, so to speak, in my tastes. I just know what moves me, and it can come from any direction in sight and sound.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because sometimes I look at like the cinema being my church. I go there, people all gather together. It's all for the same reason. You can watch a film and enjoy it. But as time goes on, I found, maybe I'm just getting old now, but I find people are distracting on their phones, or people are talking, or people are just going there as a reason to kind of catch up with friends when I want to be there to be immersed in the visuals. But with a live music production, it doesn't matter if someone's on their phone because it's such a big power. The music is such a big part of the event. And when I go to a gig, a concert, a festival, that's the only place now that I can go and completely lose myself in what's happening, like completely.
I get that. And when I go as an audience member to a live gig, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
When I'm conducting on stage, that for me is the most exciting part of my career, because as a composer, you're often very much either alone or with one or two people in my own studio, which is where I'm talking to you from. So there's a lot of sort of being on one's own, or excuse me, being on one's own or thereabouts. And then suddenly, since 2006 particularly, doing arena tours of my musical version of the War of the Worlds, I'm on stage conducting a band, a symphonic string orchestra, and all the guest artists that are playing roles in that particular work, but knowing that there's an amazing audience that are with you. They've come to enjoy and sort of connect with you, and it's a physical workout. I get so excited for the 2.5 hours that we're on stage.
With your, obviously, War of the Worlds masterpiece, that's the only way you can word this. I remember growing up, and when CDs first came out, my parents bought Bridge Over Troubled Water and War of the Worlds, and I remember it was amazing. For it sounds like a granddad now, but I remember when CD came out, there was no more rewinding in a cassette, and we put on War of the Worlds, and the moment it came on, I'm only quite young at this age, it just was in my blood, it was in my heart, it was in my soul. I was like, fucking hell, I've never heard anything like this in my life. And the power that it had. And I know it's difficult because so much time has gone on now, but are you able to kind of put yourself back in the mindset of when you were composing this? Because surely you never would have expected the phenomenon and the huge success that came from it, because no one could anticipate it was ever going to blow up like it did, surely.
And I'm one of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The truth is, I was given an opportunity to compose and produce a musical work based on H.G. Wells's Dark Victorian Tale, and start with a blank page. And that was what was exciting me, because I loved the story. It wasn't just a shoot 'em up, knock 'em down sci-fi story, although it was credited as being the first science fiction story ever written, because it was, to me, a much darker, deeper tale. Yes, it's about a Martian invasion that starts off in Woking in Surrey in England, and then spreads all over the nation. But it was the underlying themes that moved me, the story of faith and hope, love, and particularly H.G. Wells. One of his reasons for writing the story was that he believed that invasion from one nation onto another was just wrong, dead wrong, including at that point in time in the 1890s, 1897, when he wrote it, his own nation, the British Empire, was pretty much at its peak during that period. And he was taking a bit of a pop at Queen Victoria and the British Empire. So it was a very well thought out concept, because it was, of course, in the guise of a story of amazing fantasy with Martians that are as big as bears, who are all head and brain, and they are very bionic, and they have to fit into these incredible machines that the Martians bring with them and build as soon as they land, and then incredible weaponry. And that is what completes their bodies. And this is written in 1897. So when you add all of that sort of visionary type of idea writing with the underlying themes that really is the heart of what moved me. It's no surprise that it's still in publication. So many different interpretations have been done of it. And I was fortunate to be able to meet H.G.'s son, Frank, who at the time that we approached him, the we being my dad and I, the War of the Worlds was still very much in copyright. So as much as I had just fallen in love with this book, I couldn't do anything with it unless Frank agreed to sell us all the rights that were needed. And it turned out that Frank and his agents agreed to meet us in London, my dad and I. And his agents remembered my father because when we first moved to England, I was a young boy, about 9, but my dad had just been cast into the original West End production of Guys and Dolls, a classic musical.
Yeah.
He was the romantic gambler known as Sky Masterson.
What a name.
Yeah. It's a brilliant show, and the score is glorious, and my dad, with his big baritone voice, just nailed the role. But the agents for Frank remembered my dad from Guys and Dolls. They didn't really have much of a knowledge of what my career was like at that point, but that was one of 2 key reasons they eventually sold us the rights. And the other was that I sort of set up my stall when we got to meet them, and particularly suggested to Frank that if he was in agreement to sell us his dad's rights, what I wanted to do was to do a musical interpretation based exactly on his father's work, set in the same period of time, the same key characters, the same places, as to me that just had the depth that I don't think other versions that were set in contemporary America ever had.
Yeah.
And between that and his agents having seen my dad in Guys and Dolls some years earlier, that was it. And they agreed immediately. And suddenly we had all these rights from Frank to do with what we have done ever since.
So it amazes me you had this blank canvas. I mean, that must be unbelievable. There's nothing to go off. There's nothing to influence you. There's nothing to be biased. You can literally do whatever you want. Complete control.
That's right. It's both a blessing and a bit of a scary concept.
It sounds terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, when I think back of it, and I talk about, I just want to start with a blank page. What was I thinking?
Yeah.
But what I come back to is that I wasn't just mindless about what am I going to do with a blank page. I had a brilliant piece of literature
Yeah.
that spurred me on. And just to give you one example, if I may, Mark.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. HG's first chapter is called The Eve of the War. And to me, when I read it, it just read like an overture. Something is pending. Something's going to happen. We don't know what quite yet, but there's a bit of a menace, a bit of an undercurrent to this first chapter. So I thought, that's my starting point. I'm going to compose a piece also called The Eve of the War and try to capture in music what he did in literature. And from that point on, I was following pretty much the chapters of his own book. So I was pushed along by HG. You know, he long passed away in 1946, but I felt he was looking over my shoulders and sort of steering me along the way.
It's incredible. And I suppose, what was it like when the reception to it was just so positive, that it was so iconic, that it's such a timeless now? You could listen to that piece of music or the whole composition today, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, and you can't tell me when it was recorded. It's timeless.
Well, I think in addition to HG's keeping an eye on me, I felt that my own idea for the concept of the production was that when the story was being told through the eyes of the Martians, the music would be much more aggressive, electronic, rock driven. When the story sort of switches and is told through the eyes of humanity, it's much more acoustic and a classical symphonic string orchestra. So I could see, so to speak, almost like a ping pong match where the ball is going over the net back and forth. And depending upon which side of the net it was on at that given moment, you'd be hearing the story either through the eyes of the Martians and or humanity. That gave me a real grounding because I stayed true to that right through to the very end. And it helped me. Yeah, I think grounding is the right word. It grounded me as a composer, as a producer, to know where I wanted to head. And HG's story, of course, was the cherry on the cake.
So diverting this and, translating it to stage and for performances, it must be unbelievable to have been there and throughout the decades and the years that have gone by, seen how it's grown, seen how the crowds have got bigger, but most importantly, the technologies evolved, and now the fact the little small things you'd have done in the early productions with a smaller budget, now you've got these LCD screens, you've got the leaves coming down, you've got all this incredible huge production. It must be really hard to get your head around how much it's grown over time and just how the technology's now had such an impact on the same story.
Yeah, that's a good observation. When we started touring the arenas in 2006, so we've been going a long time now. We started with what was already a big production. It had 6 big trucks that carried, whether it was our 3-ton, 35-foot tall Martian fighting machine, of course, not all constructed, taken
Yeah.
every night and reconstructed the next day, but 6 trucks. Today, we're up to 12 trucks. So
Wow.
just as physical stuff, you can imagine how much it's grown. And yes, technology drives us on because every year or two there's something new, and I'm thinking, crumbs, I got to have that, and so I start all over again in about a 12 to 15 month period before our next tour. So we're touring next March and April across Europe, Ireland, and the UK. And I started 12 to 15 months ago because there's new ideas, experimenting with things. Some don't work, some do. And then I get a little tap on the shoulder from our production manager, who's been with us since the very beginning, who says, "Jeff, are you aware of how much that idea is going to cost?" And then I sort of fall from the trees down to the ground with a mighty bump and realize this long list of wishes that I've got reduces itself down to a small handful of key things that do make their way into the next production. So over 19 or so years now, the production has grown and grown and continues to grow. Our next tour is going to be quite different from our previous, still cemented together by my musical score. Although even I'm thinking as we speak here, I added a new song in 2014. Why? Nobody asked me to. Nobody suggested I do that. I just found a space in the show where I've been performing this production since 2006. And now 8 years later, I suddenly realized, there is a place, and I think it's going to work great. And it did. So it has remained in ever since.
And when it comes to casting, I was blown away because one of my favorite bands, and they've been on the podcast, is Enter Shikari. So Rao Reynolds, I know well. I've met him a few times, and he's probably one of the most intelligent people I've ever sat down and spoken to. His brain works like nobody else, but his voice, his everything about him, his songwriting, his use of technology, and the way he's evolved the band Enter Shikari blows my mind. So then to see him on the poster and announced to be part of this production, I wondered how that came about for you.
Well, it's the starting point in terms of our casting, Mark, is always the same. We go to people whose work I admire.
Yeah.
And I'm always making notes. If I see somebody or hear a band along the way. And I know that we've got a tour coming up in a given year. I'm making notes. Oh, that person might be perfect for a given role. So with Enter Shikari, pretty much a fan for a long time. And I did think Rao, with his personality and his voice, what a voice, would make a perfect young artilleryman. So we made contact with through his management company. And as I've learned, and I don't know what your experiences are, although you said he's really intelligent, which I completely agree, but I found him to be enthusiastic about wanting to meet up, talk about coming into the War of the Worlds as the young artilleryman, but being very cautious in the way he responded, not
Yeah.
overly committing, asking a lot of questions. And then eventually he wanted to do it, and then he came back. And as I've done with every guest artist since we began touring, they come in and we record to master standard their entire role, which can be singing, acting, a bit of both. And I then mix it and send them, whoever the artist is, a good mix, and to ask for their feedback if they have any, or I might say I've got a few tweaks I'd like to come back and do if you'd consider doing that. And with Rao specifically, one of our most valuable studio members here in my studio is a lady named Lindsay, who has been with me and our work for many years now. She found a video on the internet of Rao playing the trumpet.
Yes.
And well, if you knew he did that, I didn't. So I was only seeing
Wow.
this video, and there he is coming into the studio to now record the artilleryman's role. And I waited pretty much to the end. And I said, "Oh, Rao, by the way, I understand you play a mean trumpet." And in his conservative way of replying, as I've learned, he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, we've never had an artilleryman. We've never had any guest artist pick up an instrument and play in a one or two appropriate moments within the role of the given character." Yes. And I just said, "Look, if you trust me to write a couple of little segments for you within the main piece that the artilleryman does, called Brave New World, which is his vision of how mankind can survive uh, during this Martian invasion, I think it could work and be very exciting. We've never done this. Would you give it a go?" Yes. So the bottom line is, I did write a couple of pieces, and he's coming in very soon to actually play them, and will commit, I hope, to them being part of his live performance. And I'm very excited about it, because now that I know him well enough to know how he takes his time to make a decision, his at least his yes didn't turn into a no.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited to see Rao, and he's a natural performer. I truly believe that there's some people that are born to be on stage, and if it's with Enter Shikari or as part of War of the Worlds or part of whatever he does, if it's just an acoustic in a bar, that man is oozing with talent, and it's part of his DNA. So I can't wait to see how it's going to work for yourself.
Thank you. Well, I'm really excited. I've at least had the benefit of working in my studio with him on a couple occasions after meeting him, uh, just to chat it through. So I'm very excited. In fact, our whole cast is shaping up brilliantly, and the full cast will be announced actually very soon.
Amazing. So when you said you got this little notebook and you're always taking notes and you're listening to bands and you're thinking, I won't quote you on this, but has there ever been like a dream guest or a list that would just be the icing on the cake that might not be achievable, but it's just a really nice to have moment for yourself to think, if I could have that person in that role, that would be it.
Well, probably yes. I've got this little book, and the names now fill most of it up. The thing about casting, in this case, the War of the Worlds, it seems simple to some people. I've often been asked, how do you choose your guest artists? my answer is always the same. I don't get to choose. I get to ask and
Yeah.
hope they'll be interested. And if they are interested, are they available? Because they're usually very successful artists in their own right, either solo artists or members of a band. And then if they're available, like they may not be doing any touring or new recording work. And so they have a window of time that interests them to come into the show. And then probably the biggest hurdle is then you get passed over to their agents or their managers, and then you learn what their artist is expecting to receive,
Yeah.
or the agent is saying, this is what my artist is expecting to receive. And many times over all these years, they're just in another stratosphere.
Yeah.
And we have to abandon the hope of that given artist. Specifically about dream casting, yeah, there's been a whole bunch, male and female, that we've just not been able to secure for one of those sort of three basic reasons. Uh, and you never know because we have had over the years an artist or two, or three actually, I can think of, that their managers kept saying no, usually because of the requirements of money. And then you learn that that same artist is now appearing in a West End musical with a leading role, and you've discovered that that artist has taken on a different manager,
Yeah.
which has become, I think, a little more common. And we've then gone to that particular manager and for the same artist that we've been turned down to two, three, four times. And the manager says, yeah, I think this is something for whoever it might be. And they're on board, and the managers who work in theater, particularly, they understand that there's just so much a theater production can afford.
Yeah.
So they're not expecting the same artist who, from the pop world, is used to giant earnings, deservedly so. It's not about whether they deserve it.
Yeah, of course.
It's just simply that the music world, if you can sell out uh, concert halls, arenas, stadiums, you've done something special, and so you deserve to earn whatever you can.
Yeah. It must be difficult because, like you said, it is such a different world, but it's also a different routine, isn't it? Like the whole production, the whole tour, it's a different demand. It's a different world.
Yeah, there's a discipline in theater, whether you're a singer, an actor, a dancer, they're all trained usually. They come from one school of drama, performance, or another, usually speaking. And they are so disciplined, trained that they take direction, they are responsive, they're prepared for long days to get the performance as desired, not only by the directors and the producers, but the artists themselves. And I've always noticed that. I guess with my dad, going back to his era, this is what I grew up with. I knew how much he used to prepare, even for a recording session, much less a show or whatever it might be. So the theater world produces seriously disciplined artists.
I know you don't always want to reveal how the magic trick is done, but what can people expect that are buying tickets right now for next year? The venues are incredible, the arenas are amazing, they're sound systems at places like Birmingham I've been to for many concerts, and I'm so excited. I'm thinking, wow. And I'm just thinking, are you able to give anyone a little kind of taste or a bit of a hint of what they're going to see or what they're going to experience on those magical evenings with you and that incredible cast?
Um, yes, I mean I'll give you a few things because it's not giving away so much, but very proud as I mentioned earlier about Rao coming on and as the artilleryman, but hopefully going to play some couple of mean little licks in there. That's brand new for us, but technology keeps growing. So Liam Neeson, who appears in 3D holography, we've now committed to probably the best type of 3D screens. They're LED based, and the clarity and the 3D experience is only going to be the best that it's ever been. We have some new tricks that happen along the way. We have a bridge that's developed from being on the stage while the artilleryman performs Brave New World, which is about a 12-minute piece. Whereas now we have a bridge that's been hiding from the audience up above where you can't see it. And then suddenly, when the cue for Brave New World to start, it descends, doesn't land on the stage, it lands over the audience
Oh, wow.
and attaches itself to the stage, but it allows the artilleryman to sort of leave the stage and perform a large chunk of Brave New World, not only on the bridge, but then there's some steps that go down in further in front of the audience on what we call a B stage. So he's in the audience, and the audience, whether they're behind him, above him, around him, they get to feel this character in a very live and emotional way. So that's a couple of things. We
That
have,
sounds so exciting already. That bridge is going to be incredible. I can already picture it in my head. I'm like, oh, wow.
yeah, it's pretty sensational. It's even being dressed up even more so for this next tour. But it's a very effective bit of kit. It's big and it has a lot of excitement when the audience suddenly see it coming from above. They've not been expecting it. We still have our Martian fighting machine, 35 feet at full extension, weighs just over 3 tons, and it now fires real flames over the audience. Its weapon, the heat ray, used to fire sort of laser lights, but somehow,
Are you sitting there getting this warmth above you, thinking, "What? There's the flames."
well, I tell you, I'm conducting on stage
Yeah.
on a podium, and I'm not that far away when it fires over my head, and I'm sometimes I'm ducking because I can see the angle that the fighting machine is setting itself, and it now it moves, it grooves, it does more things than it ever did. So, in a way, this is what I mean by the War of the Worlds is really evolution, not revolution.
Yeah.
But compare with the first couple of tours that when we started in 2006 to the ones that we're now doing, particularly the next one next year, it's almost unrecognizable in a physical sense.
It sounds amazing. And I was thinking, do you kind of have to train yourself mentally and physically for these tours that are coming up? Because obviously it's quite demanding. It's a lot of nights, it's a lot of late days, it's a long, long process. It's over a couple of months. And bands, I speak to a lot of bands that do tours of 10 dates and they're exhausted and they try and get a better work-life balance and they try and ridiculously like eat healthier, go to the gym, get themselves, in a really good shape mentally, knowing that they've got quite a lot of demands coming up. But the dates on this tour for you next year, it looks tiring just looking at the poster. So I feel like, do you have to kind of make sure you've got a really strict schedule, a really healthy lifestyle, a really good balance?
Well, yes, from a personal point of view, fortunately I've stayed in pretty good shape throughout my life. I still play tennis 2, 3 times a week. I train. I have a little gym at my house, and I'm very conscious of the fact that when I get up on the podium, other than about a 20-minute interval, it's a 2.5 hour performance and it's nonstop. And I guess blame me because it's my own creation, the music. I get carried away quite often, well over the top, and I'm seen jumping, dancing, keeping my arms flapping so that everybody knows the time signatures and all the right things a conductor should be doing. But I am usually soaking wet at the end of each half and change my gear. But in rehearsals, it's 8 hours of continual rehearsing, and so that's like
Wow.
not far off 3 shows. So it's a real workout, but I love it because the live performance to me is the payoff for all the work we did in getting a new production going.
And as we're sitting here a couple of days' time now, we'll be getting a new vinyl. Obviously, people now are obsessed with vinyl again. It's quite nice to see all the different variants and different editions and how kind of people will queue up outside a shop at 5 in the morning to get this exclusive variant. But how does it feel when you see the list of artists and get to see another edition of your absolute timeless classic now coming again in a different variant.
Well, it's exciting. I mean, when I did the War of the Worlds, it was the main format was vinyl, uh,
Yeah,
black vinyl. So sitting here all these many years later, having seen new iterations, so to speak, of it coming out, and including vinyl being revived and popular again. But the two double albums that are about to really kick in, one is my original double album, which has been remastered and it sounds great, but it's been released on uh, red and green vinyl, and then on Saturday I'm going to be at HMV Oxford Street doing
doing
a
a signing. Yeah,
signing. Yep, and it's to celebrate National Album Day, which the BPI, the British Phonograph Institute,
yeah,
have been doing for 7 or 8 years, and they ask certain artists, bands to support National Album Day because of some recording, an album that they've done. And with me, I've been fortunate to be asked to be one of the ambassadors for this year's National Album Day. And with it, we are releasing a double album of club remixes. Some have been hits in the past, and others are brand new. So it's a really good mix of dub music. And I called the double album Ula de Bula, which is Ula, which is an H.G. Wells word, which is the exclamation that the Martians uh, exclaim when they're terrorizing the Earth, or when they're dying at the very end of the story. Becomes their death wail. And I've composed music for both emotions, but it's the word Ula. So Ula, dub as in dub music, and Ula again. But
not the easiest one to remember.
well, if you remember it as one word,
Yeah, there we
Ula,
go.
like um, uh, abracadabra.
Yeah, I
Ula de
love it. Ula de Bula. What I do on this interview, every guest that comes on, and it's never changed with my starting question and my final question, and I think you'll enjoy this a lot, Jeff, because it makes the episodes very unique. The guest that comes on the podcast, I will put on the spot, so I'm being a little bit cruel today. I've not given you any prep for this, but what happens at the end of the interview after it's all edited, it's all mixed, all the levels are right, and the world get to listen to me and you talk? You get to choose a song. It can be by any band, any piece of music, any composition, but a song that means a lot to you that then is played at the very end. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm sure with your career and everything you do, there must be a million songs in your head. But I want to try and get it down to just one that you absolutely adore, that you would love to be played after our chat today.
Well, we chatted a bit about my dad, so if I can
Yeah.
bring it into the more personal world rather than the countless wonderful recordings by other artists, songwriters. Um, there's a song from Guys and Dolls called My Time of Day, which came out on the cast album of other songs that he sang in the show. But it's a very moody, uh, introspective song, but it's quite beautiful. Including he whistles in the middle. It's sort of like an instrumental break. He was a fantastic whistler, as it turned out. But my time of day. So if I can be asking for that record to be played, I'd really love to hear it on your show.
Of course, I mean, it doesn't get much more personal than being able to pick your dad's song. You know, I think some people will pick a song that they met maybe their partner or they got married to, or one of their first songs they learnt growing up on the guitar or something. But to be able to pick something so personal to you and have such a beautiful reason to choose it, it already excites me, and I haven't even added it onto the episode yet. So I think that's probably the perfect send off and the perfect end for today's chat.
Well, thank you for that and for allowing me to have a record of my dad's on.
Of course. So I suppose now it's get ready for Saturday, get ready to sign lots of vinyl, and then get into rehearsals. And before you know it, we'll be March, April next year, and it's going to be all go.
Getting closer by the day.
Well, I hope to get tickets to it's the Birmingham. Is it I forgot, they changed the name of the venue, but it's the Birmingham Arena.
It is. Yeah, I'm with you. So many of the arenas have changed their names that I'll suddenly say, we're going to be at whatever the arena is. And it changed its name 2 years earlier, and I wasn't aware of it. But anyway, we'll be in Birmingham. And if you do come, perhaps let us know, and we can maybe attach a face to a name in person.
That'd be incredible. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jeff, and I wish you all the luck with the incredible production.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and Jeff Wayne. What an amazing guy. Genuinely a genius. Created an absolute musical masterpiece, and I am so excited to go next year and see the live show because it's meant to be absolutely phenomenal. It's been going for decades, and just to get to see this in the actual flesh is going to be so good, and I can't wait to see how they do it with Enter Shikari's Rao Reynolds. It's just going to be unbelievable. If you're interested, go and get yourself a ticket. There's various dates across 2 months, all across the UK and Europe, and I know it's going to be a night that's going to be really special. Also, if you've enjoyed today's episode and you thought, yeah, this is great, why not just take the time to share it? I say it on every single episode because it's so big and so crucial to get the name of Mark and me out there through word of mouth. So if you're on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram or even TikTok, why not just tell your friends about this episode? So many people will know Jeff's work, so many people will know War of the Worlds, and will hopefully find this interview fascinating. So all I ask for you to do today, and I'll always keep the episodes free, is just hit that share button. It takes 1 or 2 minutes and will absolutely make a huge impact to Mark and me. I do also have a Patreon account. I can't afford to host this podcast on all these different podcast directories and travel the country to do these interviews without some money coming in, but I don't actually pay myself. All the money that comes in on Patreon goes right back into the production of the podcast. It means I can host the podcast for all the people in the world to get access to. It means I can travel to festivals and gigs to do these interviews and basically give you guys at home more and more interviews. And to say thank you, I don't just take your money, I give you in return a badge, some stickers, a monthly newsletter, podcasts that are only available to people on Patreon, and so much more. So if you do want to support me, the link is on markandme.com and goes hell of a long way. And finally, let's give a shout out to Richer Sounds, another podcast sponsor. If you're in the market to watch War of the Worlds on a brand new telly or a 4K Blu-ray player, or just get yourself the soundtrack and listen on some great speakers, why not go on richersounds.com or visit any of their high street stores, because they truly are the best out there. And that's why I'm so grateful that we are partners for the Mark and Me podcast. Right. After the last few episodes of Terrifier 3, and now you've got War of the Worlds, I'm not slowing down. There's going to be another episode, and it's going to be horror related in only 2 days' time. So, until then, go and listen to War of the Worlds soundtrack, go and buy yourself a ticket to the show, and I'll be back and speak to you all very soon.
Thank you for bringing me back. I must have behaved very badly.
No, you were fine.
What time is it?
I don't know, 4 o'clock.
This is your time of day, isn't it? I'm not usually up this late.
How do you like it?
So peaceful and wonderful.
You're finding out something I've known for quite a while. My time of day is the dark time, a couple of deals before dawn, when the street belongs to the cop, and the janitor with the mop, and the grocery clerks are all gone. When the smell of the rain-washed pavement comes up clean and fresh and cold, and the street lamp light fills the gutter with gold. That's my time of day, my time of day. And you're the only doll I've ever wanted to share it with me. Obadiah.
Obadiah, what's that?
Obadiah Masterson, that's my real name. You're the first person I ever told it to.